Here's another question I got, and this one was typed. So yeah, whoever did that, get my attention there, typed it out for me. So the question is, what's the deal with witchery? I always hear how evil it is, and that it is a sin, but I never was told anything more than that about it. Why is magic okay in Lord of the Rings, but witchery so bad? Should I avoid getting a magic broom that lets me fly in a video game, just because I would have to perform witchery? Alright, so the first thing I'm going to say about this is that if your parents tell you you can't play a certain video game, can't watch a certain whatever, just obey them in that. Alright? Like when I was growing up, Harry Potter books first came out, my parents at first would not let me read them at all. And I wanted to, because my friends were reading them, wouldn't let me do it. Because I read some article on the internet and without even looking at giving everything a second look, just said nope, absolutely not. And I obeyed them. And then eventually, guess what? They eventually let me read them because they were convinced otherwise by other people who read them, other adults who read them. So when it comes to that kind of thing, just give it time. I wouldn't don't be disobedient to your parents in that area. That's not a hill to die on. You will survive without a certain video game or a certain book or a certain movie until when you move out, yeah, so whatever, right? You'll live. So the first thing I'll say about that. Second thing is you bring up a good point though. There might be some kind of inconsistency, at least on the surface. If your parents are okay with Lord of the Rings, for example, and not okay with something that is more explicitly related to maybe witchcraft or something like that. And a large part of the reason for that is that you typically witches and things like that are more directly associated with our actual world, right? So there are people in the actual world we live in who practice witchcraft, and they believe that, and in some cases are correct, that they derive any kind of abilities that they may obtain from the demonic, that they are tapping into the demons that actually exist. And so in that sense, I can kind of understand their concerns, right? Now, most video games and things like that deal with witchcraft and have things like that are using the names, but they don't mean the same thing as people who actually live in our world. They typically are set in a fantasy setting, like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is set in a different world, and so the magic done on Lord of the Rings is not claiming to come from the demonic. It's just that's how their world works. It's like when we use physics and science to create chemicals or fly or in airplanes, right, and things like that. That is just that's using the way the world functions already. In fantasy settings, typically the authors of that, to make it clear that it's something different from our world, they'll call it magic. That's just it's a distinction without a difference. What I'm saying. That in those fantasy settings, that's typically just the way that their world operates, and that it just seems magical to us because we don't live in such a world. The world we live in has certain laws and ways that physics operate that those actions would be outside the bounds of. Like, I can't shoot a fireball out of my hand. I can't do it. Not in our world, right? In a different fantasy setting, that the author of that fantasy setting, the creator of it, might call that magic. They aren't necessarily implying with that, by calling it magic, that it comes from demons. It's like the author of Lord of the Rings, as far as we know, was a Christian, and he was not implying in any way that the magic that came from like Gandalf or somebody was coming from a demon in our world, right? So that's the difference between the two. That's one of the things you asked. So that's the main difference, and that's why your parents may be comfortable with Lord of the Rings and not comfortable with something else. And so it really depends on what they're claiming is going on in that system. Now, if you are in a video game and there are demons in it, right? So often they'll call certain creatures demons, but they don't mean demons in the way that we do. They don't mean fallen angels typically, because they're usually set in fantasy settings. So even there's a difference. Even if they use the same language, they mean something different, right? But again, just what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily sinful for you to, right, get a broom in a video game that lets you fly. Like, you're playing a Harry Potter video game, or you're playing, I played World of Warcraft for 8 years. Call me a nerd. It's cool. I was and am. And during the Halloween event in World of Warcraft, they give you a little broom that lets you fly around. But World of Warcraft is not set in our world, so they're not saying that you're flying on demons that are lifting the broom up under you. That's not what they're claiming. So that's the key difference there, right? So yeah, it's a distinction. It's an important distinction to make, and there are people who live in our world who do claim to call on demons, and we should not get involved in that. But as far like video games and things like that, I think they're relatively harmless in this way. None of the people in the video games are claiming to summon demons. Now, there may be some video games that are set in our world, and while they are fantasy in the sense that they're fiction, they're made up stories and things like that. Some of them are set in our world, and some of them might include demonic things. Like, I know there's a game that exists that is about playing the son of Satan. Probably shouldn't play that game. Just saying. But other games like that, you just have to be discerning. You have to look at the content you're taking in, the media that you're consuming, and just be careful with that kind of stuff. But again, if your parents tell you no, just do what your parents say. Just do what they say. I am not saying that you can disobey your parents. It's not what I'm saying. Made that clear. Okay. Next question.